For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant. A short-lived species from a turbulent world. Biologically fragile. Technologically inefficient. In the vast records of the Galactic Council, Earth was a footnote, classified, archived, and quietly dismissed. Humanity's early history was cited as proof enough: endless internal conflict, unstable governments, repeated near collapses. A civilization too busy surviving itself to ever threaten anyone else. Ignored by the galaxy. Dismissed by those in power. The Council believed danger announced itself with conquest fleets and territorial demands. Humanity did neither. They expanded slowly. They argued constantly. Their progress lurched forward and backward in ways that looked amateurish by galactic standards. No one realized how dangerous that mistake would be. Because humanity never grew up believing the universe was stable. Their history was a catalogue of systems failing when they were needed most. Economies collapsed overnight. Governments fell without warning. Disasters rewrote rules faster than laws could keep up. Humanity survived not by trusting structures, but by learning how to rebuild after they broke. Again, and again, and again. So when humanity first brushed against the edges of galactic society, they did not arrive demanding recognition. They observed, listened, studied trade routes, diplomatic rituals, and power flows. They watched how authority was enforced, not with constant force, but with access. Who could trade? Who could speak? Who could be isolated without a single shot fired? The Council mistook this caution for submission. They believed humanity understood its place. In truth, humanity was learning the rules of a system they already expected to fail. When humanity eventually disappeared from galactic space, cut off, excluded, and quietly pushed beyond relevance, the Council barely noticed. Another minor civilization contained. Another variable removed from consideration. Years passed. Then decades. And then humanity returned. Not with announcements. Not with demands. They returned in silence. Long-range sensors detected anomalies first, navigation errors that couldn't be explained, regions of space that bent just slightly out of alignment. Trade routes recalibrated themselves without instruction. Old assumptions stopped working near human-controlled space. Council analysts dismissed the reports. Until the data kept repeating. Humanity had not returned to reclaim a place in the galaxy. They had returned already finished. The mistake had never been underestimating human strength. It had been misunderstanding human patience. Because humanity did not rush to prove itself. They did not seek validation from institutions they had already learned not to trust. They waited, watched, prepared. And when they finally stepped back into the galactic stage, it wasn't as a civilization asking to be recognized. It was as one that no longer needed permission. The Council believed control came from authority. Humanity knew better. Control belonged to whoever was prepared when the system finally broke. And the moment humanity returned, calm, silent, and unmistakably ready, the Galactic Council lost something it would never recover. Not territory. Not influence. Control. Because the galaxy had just come face to face with a truth it could no longer ignore. The most dangerous species is not the one that rises loudly. It is the one that disappears long enough to learn exactly what the universe looks like without you, and comes back prepared for what happens next. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Control like theirs was never applied all at once. It was incremental, layered in policy, buried in procedure, disguised as stewardship. First came the restrictions. Human trade licenses were flagged for review. Docking permissions stalled without explanation. Shipping insurers quietly reclassified human vessels as high risk, making commerce unprofitable without ever declaring it illegal. Trade was cut. Not with blockades or warships, but with paperwork. Medical compounds were rerouted. Advanced alloys delayed indefinitely. Precision components were declared strategically sensitive and removed from circulation. Markets across human space trembled as supply chains tightened and prices climbed. Council economists watched the data with confidence. They had seen this outcome before. Scarcity led to unrest. Unrest led to division. Division forced submission. Then came the legal measures. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost access to council chambers. Observer status was suspended pending behavioral reassessment. Information networks that once returned open data now delivered sanitized fragments, or nothing at all. Travel permits expired and were not renewed. Diplomatic channels thinned to automated acknowledgments and silence. Humanity was reclassified. Not hostile. Not criminal. Unmanaged. Isolation followed. No fleets encircled Earth. No weapons darkened human skies. The Council simply removed humanity from the systems that made participation in the galaxy possible. No arbitration. No emergency relief. No voice. Humanity was pushed into isolation with the calm certainty of an authority that believed exclusion was fatal. The Council expected collapse. They expected humanity's long history of internal division to resurface under pressure. Expected colonies to hoard resources. Expected governments to fracture and blame one another as shortages deepened. Projections were filed. Months to instability. 1 year to internal unrest. 2 years to compliance. But the collapse never came. Instead, something unexpected happened. Human systems stabilized. Emergency protocols activated before shortages peaked. Manufacturing priorities shifted without public debate. Rationing was implemented quietly, efficiently, and, most unsettling of all, calmly. There were no mass riots. No planetary secessions. Human communications traffic surged, but not with outrage. With coordination. Rival factions that had undermined one another for centuries began sharing data without treaties or announcements. Old disputes were shelved as irrelevant. The Council flagged the anomaly. Then dismissed it. They mistook restraint for denial. What they failed to understand was that humanity had rehearsed this scenario its entire history. Economic crashes. Political collapses. Environmental disasters. Systems failing when they were needed most. Isolation wasn't new. It was familiar. Humanity did not demand reinstatement. Did not appeal to council morality. Did not threaten retaliation. They did something far more unsettling. They stopped asking. Trade rerouted inward. Local industries expanded into roles once outsourced to the galaxy. Old technologies were resurrected, redesigned, and scaled beyond what council standards had ever permitted. Every regulation was followed, perfectly. Every clause obeyed to the letter. Every loophole used without technically breaking a single rule. Sanctions designed to isolate human space began rippling outward, damaging council-aligned economies that had quietly depended on human adaptability. The Council waited for fracture. It never came. Instead, human space grew quieter. More ordered. More deliberate. Reports began noting a troubling trend. Humanity was becoming self-sufficient. Less responsive to pressure. Less dependent on approval. Less affected by authority that only functioned when it was believed in. Containment had always worked because species feared isolation. Humanity did not. They treated it as a condition to engineer around. And somewhere deep in the Council's projections, a realization began to take shape, one no one was yet willing to say aloud. You cannot control a civilization that has learned how to survive without you. And once that lesson is learned, authority doesn't disappear. It simply stops mattering. Isolation was supposed to finish the job. That was the Council's certainty. Every historical precedent supported it. When pressure mounted and outside support vanished, civilizations fractured. Old rivalries resurfaced. Cooperation collapsed into competition. Containment always worked. Eventually, humanity should have broken. It didn't. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the shift was subtle enough to overlook. Political broadcasts grew shorter. Ideological arguments lost their edge. Leaders who once thrived on division found fewer audiences willing to listen. When the last sanctioned trade lanes went silent, humanity stopped arguing about who was right and started asking a far more important question. Who would still be alive tomorrow? Old divisions vanished. Not erased. Not forgiven. Set aside. Borders still existed on maps, but they stopped dictating behavior. Rival governments paused disputes that had lasted centuries without treaties or public declarations. There were no speeches about unity, no celebrations of reconciliation. Humanity did not romanticize cooperation. They defaulted to it. Because isolation stripped away illusion. There was no higher authority to appeal to. No external power to stabilize failure. No council fleet arriving to restore order if things went wrong. Humanity was alone. And once that reality settled in, priorities aligned with brutal clarity. Emergency councils formed across Earth and its colonies, but instead of multiplying bureaucracy, they dismantled it. Overlapping authorities were merged or discarded. Decision chains were shortened. Not centralized for dominance, but streamlined for speed. What emerged wasn't an empire. It was coordination. For the first time in human history, every major colony agreed on a single operational framework. Not built on ideology. Not culture. Not ambition. Survival. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't a throne or a single leader. It was a system, lean, adaptive, intolerant of inefficiency. Authority became situational. Whoever had the clearest data and fastest response acted. Prestige vanished. Ego became a liability overnight. Logistics became power. Supply chains that once competed synchronized across systems. Manufacturing priorities aligned without negotiation. Research divisions opened archives sealed for generations, sharing breakthroughs once guarded by profit, secrecy, or pride. Humanity stopped optimizing against itself. They optimized for endurance. Military forces changed, not in size, but in purpose. Fleets once aimed at deterrence were restructured to protect infrastructure, evacuation corridors, and population centers. Training doctrine abandoned decisive victories in favor of prolonged survival under catastrophic conditions. Humanity stopped planning for wars they hoped to win. They planned for disasters they intended to outlast. Civilians were folded into preparedness without ceremony. Engineers trained for emergency repair. Medics drilled for mass casualty scenarios. Colonists learned redundancy protocols as naturally as daily routines. Every person became part of the system, not as a soldier, but as a stabilizing component. Humanity did not militarize its population. It prepared it. Then came the silence. No protests. No defiant broadcasts. No pleas sent into the void. Human communication traffic actually decreased, even as coordination reached levels no external observer had ever recorded. Unity did not make humanity louder. It made them efficient. Focused. Unsettlingly calm. Council analysts, still monitoring from a distance, misread the data. Silence had always meant submission before. They believed humanity had accepted isolation. That exclusion had taught them humility. In truth, isolation had taught humanity clarity. They stopped measuring success by recognition or inclusion. They measured it by resilience. By how well systems held under pressure. By how little external approval mattered when survival was on the line. Isolation did what no treaty ever had. It forced humanity to see itself as a single organism. Every colony understood its role. Every fleet knew its purpose. Every citizen knew what was at stake. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Not out of anger. Not out of defiance. Out of necessity. And that was the moment the Council truly lost control, though it would take time for them to realize it. Because a divided species can be managed. A fractured civilization can be pressured. But a species unified by survival, one that no longer believes authority guarantees safety, cannot be contained. Humanity had not united to challenge the galaxy. They had united to endure it. And once they did, the balance shifted, quietly, permanently, toward a future where control no longer flowed from titles or councils, but from those prepared to stand together when everything else fell apart. In silence, humanity evolved. There were no announcements, no ceremonial unveilings, no broadcasts meant to reclaim attention or legitimacy. Humanity had learned the cost of visibility and chose obscurity instead. Isolation removed distraction. Research institutions that once competed were fused into cooperative networks. Projects stalled for political convenience were accelerated by necessity. Engineers stopped designing for approval and started designing for failure, assuming supply lines would vanish, communications would break, and help would never arrive. New engines came first. Not engines built for speed records or territorial expansion, but for endurance. Drives capable of operating for years without resupply. Propulsion systems tolerant of damage, inefficiency, and improvised repair. Human ships sacrificed raw velocity for reliability, redundancy, and range. They could go farther without support. They could stay longer without resupply. They no longer depended on permission to move. Then came the shields. Galactic doctrine favored singular, overwhelming energy barriers, powerful, elegant, and catastrophic when they failed. Humanity rejected that model entirely. They layered everything. Adaptive fields that reshaped under pressure. Redundant systems that degraded gradually instead of collapsing all at once. Structural composites that absorbed force rather than resisted it. Human shields were not flawless. They were relentless. They bent. They cracked. They kept working. Weapons development followed, but quietly. Humanity did not pursue extinction-level firepower or dramatic superweapons. They focused on systems that functioned after prolonged isolation, repaired by crews with limited tools in deep space. Human weapons were not elegant. They were dependable. And then there were the fleets. They were not assembled in massive shipyards that could be observed, catalogued, and threatened. Production was distributed across dozens of systems. Hull sections fabricated in civilian industries. Components built to common standards, modular and interchangeable. No single ship mattered. No single loss could cripple the whole. Fleets were built not for conquest, but survival. Human naval doctrine evolved alongside them. Ships were designed to operate independently, cut off from command, guided by shared principles rather than constant communication. Crews were cross-trained relentlessly. Every officer understood logistics. Every technician understood combat repair. Human fleets assumed chaos as the default. Loss of communication. Overwhelming odds. Extended isolation. They trained until those conditions felt routine. The galaxy noticed nothing. Council sensors detected no alarming mobilization. No aggressive maneuvers. No treaty violations. After all, humanity was no longer bound by treaties at all. Human space appeared quiet, constrained, irrelevant. Exactly as intended. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Not for revenge. For inevitability. Human simulations grew darker. Scenarios assumed hostile powers, collapsing alliances, and enemies immune to diplomacy. Victory was redefined. Not defeat the enemy. Ensure continuation. If a colony survived, the mission succeeded. If a fleet endured catastrophic loss and still functioned, the mission succeeded. If humanity remained, everything else was secondary. Command structures flattened. Authority became situational. Any unit could assume control. Any plan could be abandoned instantly if reality demanded it. Humanity stopped fearing failure. They learned to absorb it. The Council, reviewing outdated reports, concluded humanity had stagnated. That isolation had capped their development. That containment had worked. They were wrong. Humanity had not slowed. They had finished building. What remained was refinement. Stress testing. Quiet positioning beyond assumption and observation. And when the moment finally came, when humanity returned to a galaxy that believed it still held control, the galaxy would not find a weak civilization seeking forgiveness or recognition. It would find a species that had spent years preparing for a universe that never planned to protect them. Because humanity never trusted stability. They trusted readiness. And they were ready. The first warning was easy to dismiss. A frontier system failed to report in, no distress signal, no debris, no signs of conflict. Council analysts labeled it a sensor malfunction and moved on. Border regions were unstable. Data gaps were routine. Then a second system went silent. Then a third. By the time the pattern became undeniable, unsanctioned jump routes were flooded with refugees carrying corrupted recordings, fragmented telemetry, and a single name spoken with growing certainty. The Dominion. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They arrived. The Dominion was not an alliance or an ideology. It was an empire engineered for expansion, every doctrine refined for speed, efficiency, and permanence. Their fleets moved with mechanical precision, overwhelming defenses before panic could fully organize into resistance. Worlds fell. Orbital platforms were neutralized within minutes. Planetary shields collapsed under sustained, methodical pressure. Defense fleets were dismantled in sequence, not annihilated in spectacle, but rendered irrelevant. Infrastructure was seized intact wherever possible. The Dominion did not seek chaos. They sought control. Species were enslaved, not exterminated, catalogued. Populations were sorted by utility. Administrators retained. Labor forces reassigned. Biological resources indexed. Resistance was not punished publicly. It was removed quietly, efficiently, and permanently. Fear spread faster than the invasion itself. Council-aligned task forces were dispatched, veteran fleets equipped with technologies that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. They engaged the Dominion and vanished. Not in explosions, but in silence. Their formations unraveled under tactics the Council had never prepared for. And still, the Council argued. Emergency sessions convened and collapsed into procedural paralysis. Ancient rivalries resurfaced. Voting blocs stalled action. Committees debated jurisdiction and response thresholds, while live feeds showed cities burning and evacuation corridors failing. Some delegates called for negotiation. Others demanded sanctions. A few proposed sacrifice, ceding outer systems to buy time. Time was something the Dominion did not allow. As invasion fronts pushed inward, Council authority fractured. Member species recalled fleets to defend their own worlds. Mutual defense treaties were reinterpreted, delayed, or quietly ignored. Trade collapsed as fear overrode obligation. The Council could recommend. It could debate. It could not act. Within cycles, the unthinkable became reality. The Galactic Council, the oldest authority the galaxy had ever known, was losing. That was when the chamber fell silent. Someone spoke the name no one wanted to hear. Humanity. The objections were immediate. Humanity had been isolated, marginalized, declared irrelevant. Their fleets were undocumented. Their technology unverified. Their intentions unknown. Some delegates insisted humanity had likely collapsed long ago, another failed civilization erased by its own insignificance. But others remembered. Human space had gone quiet years before the Dominion appeared. No collapse. No refugee waves. No desperate transmissions begging for reintegration. Just absence, orderly, deliberate absence. Reluctantly, the Council authorized contact. The message they sent was careful, polite, urgent without sounding desperate. It spoke of shared survival, collective defense, and the need for unity against an existential threat. It did not mention sanctions. It did not include apologies. Humanity received it. They did not respond immediately. While Council worlds burned, humanity reviewed the data. Dominion fleet movements. Tactical doctrine. Logistics throughput. Behavioral patterns. They compared it against internal simulations, some of which mirrored the unfolding invasion with disturbing precision. The Council expected panic. They got deliberation. When humanity finally replied, the response was calm, measured, almost unsettling in its restraint. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses were insufficient. They stated, plainly, that humanity possessed the capability to engage. There was no promise of rescue, only consideration. The Council protested, invoked shared destiny, demanded urgency, reminded humanity of what was at stake. Humanity did not hurry. Because another system fell, this one close enough to the Council core that evacuation sirens echoed through the chamber itself. Delegates who had argued procedure minutes earlier now begged for intervention. And in that moment, the truth crystallized. The Council had isolated the one civilization that had prepared for abandonment. They had dismissed the species that planned for systemic failure. They had ignored the people who built for survival instead of dominance. The Dominion did not fear authority. It did not respect tradition. It did not pause for debate. And the only civilization that had planned for an enemy like that was the one the Council had pushed aside. With no leverage left and no illusions remaining, the Galactic Council did the unthinkable. They turned to humanity, not as a subordinate, not as a member, but as the last civilization that might still be capable of acting, while the rest of the galaxy was still arguing over what should be done. And in that choice, the Council lost something it would never regain. Not territory, not prestige, but the right to decide what happened next. The Council expected forgiveness. They prepared for it the way they always did, carefully measured statements, softened language, responsibility diluted into phrases like shared survival and past necessity. In every crisis before this one, fear had produced reconciliation. Authority bent, apologized just enough, and endured. They believed humanity would follow the pattern. Humanity did not. The response arrived without ceremony. No emotional framing. No accusations. Just confirmation of receipt, verification of the intelligence provided, and a short list of discrepancies in the Council's threat assessments. The Council answered immediately. Then they waited. When humanity's decision finally came, it was calm, so calm it unsettled the chamber more than outrage ever could. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses would fail. They stated that humanity had prepared for a scenario of this nature. Then came the sentence that emptied the room of sound. We will decide when to act. No conditions followed. No appeal for trust. No demand for apology. Just resolve. The Council erupted. Delegates shouted about moral obligation and collective extinction. Some accused humanity of cruelty. Others of arrogance. A few tried to reassert authority, invoking charters, jurisdiction, and sanctions as if repetition might restore their power. Humanity did not respond. They didn't need to, because authority does not survive the moment it is ignored. Within hours, deep space observatories began reporting anomalies near the edges of human-controlled space. Not weapons fire. Not fleet movements. Something subtler. Gravitational sensors detected rhythmic distortions, too precise to be natural. Navigation beacons recalibrated themselves without instruction. Light bent slightly out of alignment, as if the structure of space were being adjusted rather than disturbed. Council engineers blamed calibration errors. They were wrong. Independent traders began transmitting reports, vast silhouettes appearing and vanishing beyond detection thresholds. Not fleets in formation, but structures repositioning with deliberate intent. Patterns forming across regions too large to dismiss as coincidence. Humanity was not mobilizing. They were aligning. A final transmission arrived, short, unencrypted, unmistakably human. Any engagement with the Dominion would occur on human terms. Timing, location, and scope would be determined by human command. Council authorization was unnecessary. Oversight would not be accepted. This was not a threat. It was a boundary. For the first time since its founding, the Galactic Council faced a truth it could not debate away. Humanity did not need its permission, did not fear its displeasure, did not confuse urgency with obligation. As the chamber dissolved into chaos, something unexpected happened on the invasion front. The Dominion slowed. Not halted. Not repelled. Just slowed, enough for their commanders to notice gaps in predictive models that had never failed before. Enough to sense resistance before it appeared. Somewhere beyond the reach of Council authority, something vast finished positioning itself. Space itself began to tremble. Humanity had not yet acted. But the galaxy already understood what the Council could not. Forgiveness is requested by the powerless. Permission is sought by the dependent. Humanity was neither. And when they finally chose to act, it would not be because they were asked, but because they had decided the moment had arrived. The Dominion never saw the war begin. There was no spike in subspace energy, no shockwave rippling ahead of an advancing fleet, no warning that reality itself was about to change. One moment, Dominion armadas advanced through conquered systems with mechanical certainty, thousands of warships aligned in doctrines that had broken empires and erased resistance. The next moment, space was no longer empty. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. They did not arrive from anywhere. There was no translation flash, no rupture, no violence to mark their appearance. They simply resolved into existence, vast shapes unfolding from the dark as if the universe had accepted them as inevitable. Massive, precise, unstoppable. The formations were wrong by every known doctrine. Not clustered for assault. Not spread for intimidation. They occupied exact positions across light minutes of space, sealing escape vectors before the Dominion even realized they existed. This wasn't a battle line. It was a closure. Dominion sensors struggled to reconcile the data. Targeting solutions lagged behind reality. Command algorithms recalculated endlessly, unable to explain how so much mass had appeared without violating assumptions that had never once failed them. Before a single firing order could be issued, every channel lit up. Primary command frequencies. Encrypted tactical relays. Emergency fallback bands. Even internal coordination networks believed to be unreachable. One message crossed every protocol simultaneously. Stand down. It wasn't amplified. It wasn't hostile. It carried no emotion, only certainty. The Dominion fired. They always did. The opening volley never reached its targets. Human defenses did not intercept the energy. They absorbed it. Layered fields reshaped in real time, bending and redistributing force across systems designed to endure punishment rather than resist it. Power that should have overwhelmed any known shield simply vanished into controlled dissipation. The Dominion adapted instantly. They never got the chance to fire again. Across the invasion fleet, weapon systems desynchronized by fractions of a second, imperceptible alone, catastrophic together. Power grids slipped out of phase. Reactors throttled to emergency limits. Shields collapsed inward, not destroyed, but rendered inert. Drives failed. Thousands of ships went dead in space. Alive. Intact. Helpless. Humanity had not attacked the fleet. They had removed its ability to fight. Dominion command structures unraveled in moments. Emergency protocols refused to execute. Self-destruct systems failed silently. Engineers screamed into command channels that no longer responded, unable to understand why their most trusted redundancies had betrayed them. Human systems were not overpowering Dominion technology. They were exploiting it. They reached into assumptions so fundamental the Dominion had never thought to protect them. Dependencies that functioned flawlessly against weaker civilizations and catastrophically against an opponent that had built everything around resilience instead of dominance. Then one human vessel moved. It advanced alone, gliding forward with deliberate calm. Its hull bore no insignia. No declaration of authority. Just a presence so controlled it felt inevitable. It transmitted once more. This conflict is concluded. There were no demands. No negotiations. The statement was final. As the signal propagated through Dominion command networks, fleets in neighboring systems halted mid-advance. Slave transports powered down. Occupation forces abandoned positions without orders, unsure whether movement itself would trigger the same silent neutralization. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Only then did humanity acknowledge the galaxy. A single open transmission, brief, factual, and devoid of triumph. The threat had been neutralized. Hostilities were concluded. No territory had changed hands. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to stop the war. Council observers watched in stunned silence as Dominion armadas drifted powerless in the dark, entire fleets undone without spectacle, without devastation, without permission. And in that moment, the galaxy understood what the Council already feared. Control had not been lost in debate. It had not been surrendered in panic. It had vanished the instant humanity returned. Because the war was over the moment they decided it was. The Council tried to reclaim control. Emergency sessions were called within hours of the Dominion's collapse. Ancient charters were retrieved and quoted as if tradition itself could reassert authority. Jurisdictional claims were reaffirmed. Oversight committees were proposed, then expanded, then proposed again with sharper language. The galaxy listened. And then it moved on. It was too late. Because control does not return once it is proven optional. Worlds that had survived the invasion rebuilt without waiting for council approval. Defense agreements formed laterally, not hierarchically, between neighbors who had learned the cost of hesitation. Trade resumed along routes humanity had stabilized, not the sanctioned corridors the council once regulated. The council still existed, but it was no longer central. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They declined every offer of permanent leadership, refused expanded voting authority, ignored proposals to restructure galactic governance around them. They claimed no territory, imposed no laws, demanded no tribute. They simply stepped back, not into obscurity, but into readiness. Human fleets dispersed into the dark in patterns no strategist could reliably map. They did not loom over capitals or patrol borders. They positioned themselves near fracture points, regions where history showed authority failed first and consequences spread fastest. Always distant, always present, never demanding obedience. Slowly, the galaxy understood what humanity had become. Not rulers, not enforcers, a contingency. When disputes flared, humanity did not intervene. When empires tested one another's resolve, humanity remained silent. They issued no threats. They promised no protection. Their existence alone altered behavior. Former Dominion officers, those few left alive and unbound, spoke quietly among themselves. Not of human weapons, but of human restraint. Of fleets that could have erased them and chose instead to end the war cleanly, decisively, and without spectacle. That restraint carried more weight than terror ever could. The Council issued one final declaration, warning that a galaxy without centralized authority would descend into chaos. Few listened. Fewer believed it. Because the galaxy had learned something the Council never had. Stability enforced by tradition eventually fails. Stability enforced by readiness endures. Humanity had proven that leadership was not inherited through age or declared through titles. It emerged from preparation, from competence, from the willingness to act when action was required, and the discipline to stop when it was not. So the galaxy adapted. It always does. And somewhere beyond the bright halls where authority once lived, humanity watched the stars in silence. Not from thrones. Not from councils. From the dark. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no desire to. They had simply proven a truth no civilization could forget. If darkness rises again, if something worse comes out of the void, if the galaxy hesitates when it matters most, humanity will be there. Not to command, not to conquer, but to make sure there is still a galaxy left when the darkness falls.